In the mid-90s, we didn't just play video games, we negotiated with them. We stepped into the shoes of elite special forces, seasoned archaeologists and paranormal investigators, and then we proceeded to spend 10 minutes trying to walk through a standard issue wooden door. This was the era of the tank control, a control scheme that treated the human body less like a fluid anatomical wonder and more like a caterpillar D9 bulldozer. It's a polarising legacy. To some, it's the archaic clunk that nearly ruined a generation of gaming. To others, the tank control apologists, it was a stroke of cinematic genius that turned a technical limitation into the purest form of digital tension. Imagine, if you will, the classic survival horror setup. You're in a hallway, it's dark, the lighting is moody, and there is a low poly dog currently contemplating which of your shins looks more like a chew toy. In a modern game, you'd simply tilt the stick and sprint, but in 1996, you had to stop, you had to plant your feet, you had to rotate on an axis like a literal robot, hearing the internal gears of your brain grind as you calculated the 180-degree turn radius required not to die. It was cumbersome, it was stiff, and it was absolutely terrifying. We've spent the last 2 decades mocking the robot walk, but there is a reason the indie scene is currently sprinting, or rather, slowly rotating backwards towards this aesthetic. There is a specific kind of magic that happens when you take away a player's ability to move gracefully. When you can't just strafe away from the danger feels heavier, the world feels more solid. Today, we're putting our thumb on the D-pad and refusing to let go of the forward button. We're looking at why we move like robots, the games that made it work, the games that made us want to throw our controllers through the CRT, and why, in an era of 4K resolution and 120 frames per second, we are still obsessed with the beautiful, frustrating art of the tank. Grab your ink ribbons and your green herbs, we're going back in time when turning left was a tactical decision. Welcome to the PSX Index, I'm Parasine, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across Northern America. This episode is a bit of a diversion from our usual grind, because today, we aren't just looking at a single entry, we're looking at a movement, or more accurately, the lack of one. To understand the PlayStation 1, you have to understand the tank control. For the uninitiated, those who grew up with twin sticks and fluid 360-degree movement, the concept sounds like a digital fever dream. In a tank control setup, the up button on your D-pad always moves the character forward in the direction they are facing. Down is a back pedal. Left and right don't make you step to the side. They rotate your character on the spot like a turret. It sounds counterintuitive, right? If you're looking at a character from a side-on camera angle and you want to go left towards the edge of the screen, you don't just press left. You have to stop, rotate your character 90 degrees to their left, and then hold up. It is the ultimate think before you move mechanic. During the mid to late 90s, this was the industry standard for 3D exploration. It wasn't just a choice made by developers who hated us, it was a mechanical solution to a cinematic problem. We were transitioning from the flat, 2D planes of the 16-bit era into fully realised 3D environments, but we didn't have the camera tech to keep up. The result was a compromise that defined the childhoods of millions. In this special deep dive, we're dissecting why this system existed, how it built the foundation for some of the greatest games ever made, and why, despite every modern quality of life improvement, we still find ourselves strangely drawn back to the Clunk. This isn't just about nostalgia, it's about a lost philosophy of game design. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to do it exactly like Chris Redfield, one agonising slow rotation at a time. To understand why we spent our youth moving like heavy machinery, we have to look at the hardware wall developers hit in the early 90s. Before we had powerful GPUs capable of rendering massive open 3D worlds, developers used a clever trick: fixed camera angles. By using a pre-rendered 2D image as a background and overlaying a 3D character model on top, games like Alone in the Dark could look decades ahead of their time, but this created a massive director's problem. If the camera is placed in the top corner of a room, and then cuts to a low angle shot from under a table when you walk past it, your perspective of left and right changes instantly. Imagine you're running towards the bottom of your screen. In a modern game with camera relative controls, you're holding the stick down. Suddenly, the camera cuts to the opposite side of the room. Now, to keep moving in the same direction, you'd have to flick your thumb to the up position instantly. If you didn't, your camera would do a hilarious immersion breaking U-turn and run back to where they just came from. It would be unplayable, a constant tug of war between your thumb and the director's vision. The tank control was an elegant, albeit stiff solution. By locking the control to the character's nose rather than the character's lens, up always meant forward. It didn't matter if the camera was behind you, in front of you, or bird's eye view. As long as you held the D-pad button, you were making progress. Infogrames pioneered this in 1992 with Alone in the Dark, but it was Capcom in 1996 that truly weaponized it. They realised that by forcing a player to pivot a human being like a semi-truck, they could dictate exactly what the player saw, and more importantly, what they didn't see. The tank control wasn't a technical bypass, it was the foundation of the jump scare. You weren't just playing with a camera, you were an actor in a horror film, and the director was a sadist. It was a marriage of necessity and style. We were moving like robots because at the time, it was the only way to ensure we didn't spend the entire game running in circles like a dog chasing its own tail. We traded our agility for a front row seat to the most cinematic environments gaming has ever seen.
What is this? What's going on here?
By the time the PlayStation reached its stride, the Clunk had been elevated to an art form. This was the era where developers stopped apologising for the tank and started designing around it. If Alone in the Dark was the rough blueprint, Resident Evil was the cathedral built upon it. Capcom understood that if you give the player a tank, you should probably give them a minefield to navigate. The brilliance of the golden era wasn't just the movement, it was the spatial awareness it demanded. In Resident Evil 2, when you're navigating the RPD hallways, you aren't just running, you're plotting a trajectory. You knew that Leon or Claire had a specific turn rate. You knew that if a zombie lunged from the shadows, you couldn't just strafe. You had to calculate, do I have enough frames to rotate 45 degrees and run, or do I take the hit? Then came Silent Hill. Konami took the tank and dropped it into a nightmare where you couldn't see the walls you were bumping into. While Resident Evil used the controls for tactical tension, Silent Hill used them for vulnerability. Harry Mason wasn't a soldier, he was a worried dad who moved with all the grace of a man wearing lead boots in a fog bank. The clunkiness reinforced the idea that you were out of your depth. We also saw the birth of the 180-degree turn. Bless you, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It was a revolutionary moment for the tank apologists. Suddenly, our robots had a turbo button. Being able to instantly flip around felt like getting a jetpack in a world of tortoises. This era proved that limitations foster creativity. Because the movement was so restricted, the level design had to be deliberate. Every hallway was measured, every enemy placement was a geometry problem. We weren't just playing games, we were mastering a specific, heavy physical language. We didn't mind that we moved like robots, because the world felt dangerous enough that a robot's chassis was the only thing keeping us safe. It was the peak of the clunky power fantasy. Of course, for every Resident Evil that used the tank to build tension, there were a dozen games that used it simply because they didn't know what else to do. This is where the clunk stopped being cinematic and started being a legitimate barrier to entry. We're talking about the games that forgot the golden rule. Tank controls only work if the world is built for tanks. Take for example, games that tried to combine tank controls with fast-paced action or, heaven forbid, platforming. There is a special circle of hell reserved for trying to stick a precision landing on a floating platform when your character has the turning circle of an oil tanker. You'd line yourself up, tap the D-pad to make a micro adjustment, and suddenly you've rotated 45 degrees and walked straight off the edge into a bottomless pit. Then you had the hybrid disasters. These were games that attempted to give you 3D freedom but kept the rigid axis-based turning. You'd have a game with a following camera that swung wildly behind you, but your character still moved like they were on a pivot. It was nauseating. You weren't fighting monsters. You were fighting a camera that seemed to be operated by a director who'd had one too many espressos. Even some of the classics struggled. Early Tomb Raider is a masterpiece of level design. But let's be honest, Lara Croft moved like she was filled with lead. The hop back and sidestep were mandatory because the actual turning was so glacial that a simple U-turn felt like a free-act play. This was the jank that people remember when they say they hate tank controls. When the environment was too cramped, the enemies too fast, or the physics too slippery, the tank became a coffin. It stopped being about cinematic tension and started being about why it took 4 tries to pick up a box of ammo off a table. These were the games that gave the apologists a bad name, the ones that proved that without careful, deliberate design, moving like a robot is just a really great way to get frustrated.
Got something that might interest you.
Evolution is rarely subtle in the tech world. By the late 90s, the industry was looking at the D-pad and seeing a relic. When the DualShock dropped in 1997, it wasn't just a new controller, it was an eviction notice for the tank. Suddenly, we had 360 degrees of freedom. Games like Super Mario 64 had already set a new gold standard on the Nintendo 64. If you pushed the left stick, Mario went left. It was intuitive, it was fluid, and it made the tank feel like a dinosaur overnight. The industry realised that while fixed cameras were beautiful, players craved agency. We wanted to look around, we wanted to run in circles just because we could. The final nail in the coffin was Resident Evil 4. It's the ultimate irony of the franchise. The series that perfected the tank was the one that officially retired it from the mainstream. Resident Evil 4 kept the up is forward logic, but it snapped the camera behind Leon's shoulder. By giving us a laser sight and a camera we could nudge, Capcom bridged the gap between the robot walk and the modern shooter. We left the tank behind because we reached the point where the hardware could finally handle the director's eye and the player's will at the same time. We didn't need the fixed camera to make things look good anymore, so we didn't need the tank to navigate those cameras. We traded the tension of the clunk for the thrill of the flow. On paper, it was a total upgrade. We were finally free of the pivot, but as we'd soon discover, when you gain total control of the camera, You lose the ability for the game to surprise you with what's lurking just an inch outside the frame. We were no longer actors in a movie, we were just guys with a gun and a very busy thumb. So, we gained the ability to strafe, we gained camera relative movement, we won, right? Well, not entirely. When we ditched the tank, we inadvertently killed a specific form of digital cinematography. In the modern era, the player is the cameraman. We have total control, which sounds great until you realise that most of us are terrible directors. We sprint through hallways, swinging the camera wildly, clipping through geometry, and staring at the floor because we're looking for loot. The tank era was different. Because you were locked into a fixed perspective, the developers could treat every screen like a composed painting. They knew exactly where your eyes would go. They could use Dutch angles to make you feel uneasy, or place the camera high in the rafters to make you feel small and hunted. There is an atmosphere gap in modern gaming that only the tank can fill. In a modern horror game, if something jumps out at you, it's usually because of a scripted trigger. In a tank control game, the horror is often architectural. It's the dread of walking towards a camera that is looking at something behind you that you can't see yet. It's the way the sound of your own heavy, robotic footsteps echoes in a silent room, emphasising the fact that you are a slow, fleshy target in a world of fast, jagged things. We lost the staged feel of games. We traded the tension of the unknown for the convenience of the 360-degree spin. The tank control forced you to exist inside the scene rather than just observing it from a floating point of view. It was a lost art of pacing, where the struggle to turn around wasn't a glitch, it was the point. It made the world feel massive and oppressive, precisely because you were so small and limited within it. We didn't just play those games, we inhabited their frames.
Something strange is happening.
Everything will be all right, I promise. I won't let anything bad happen to you. What the hell is going on here?
For a long time, the tank control was treated like a shameful family secret, something we'd all agreed to move past and never speak of again. But in the last few years, a new wave of developers has emerged, and they aren't just speaking about it, they're shouting. The tank control apologist isn't a dying breed. We're having a full-blown renaissance. Indie developers have realised what the AAA space forgot. Limitations are the secret source of horror. Leading the charge is Tormented Souls. It looks like a modern, high-fidelity game, but it plays like it's 1998. By forcing the player into fixed camera angles and rigged movements, it proves that the clunky system still provides a level of cinematic tension that over-the-shoulder cameras just can't touch. It's a reminder that when you're being hunted by something screaming in the dark, being able to strafe like a pro gamer actually kills the vibe. And then there's Crow Country, the current poster child for the movement. It blends a beautiful clunky polygon aesthetic with a world that treats every turn of your character like a deliberate tactical choice. It doesn't apologise for its roots, it celebrates them. It understands that the struggle to turn around is part of the gameplay loop, but the rabbit hole goes deeper. Alisa, this is the hardcore pick. It doesn't just use tank controls. It embraces the specific 90s voice acting and pre-rendered backgrounds that make you feel like you're playing a fever dream of a game. It is a time capsule with a pulse. Hollowbody, a tech-noir survival horror that uses long cinematic camera shots and classic movement to make the futuristic city feel as oppressive as any haunted mansion. Heartworm, a moody, lo-fi journey that captures that Silent Hill energy, focusing on the psychological weight of movement in a world that doesn't want you there. These games aren't just retro for the sake of it, they are reclaiming a lost luggage. They understand that in horror, the struggle is the game. By forcing us to move like robots again, these developers are handing us back the tension we lost when we gained total freedom. They are proving that the tank wasn't a mistake, it was a tool, and in the right hands, it's still the sharpest one in the box.
In that house, there's a room that can take you to the other side. I just wanted to let you know, in case I don't come back.
Ultimately, the story of the tank control isn't one of failure, but of a very specific, very intentional kind of focus. We moved like robots so that the world around us could feel more human, more dangerous, and more alive. In our rush to making gaming seamless, we smoothed over the very friction that made our early 3D experiences so memorable. We traded the clunk for convenience, but as any other tank apologist will tell you, convenience isn't the enemy of tension. The fact that we're seeing these tank controls return in the indie space proves it wasn't just a technical hurdle we had to clear, it was a design philosophy that still holds water. It turns out that having total 360-degree control over a character isn't always better. Sometimes you want to feel the weight of the turn, you want to feel the panic of a fixed camera angle hiding a monster just out of reach. You want to be a director, not just a player. Whether you love the tank or you're still traumatised by trying to steer Jill Valentine through a dining room, there's no denying that this era gave us a unique relationship with space and movement that we haven't seen since. We didn't just play these games, we mastered them, we learned their rhythms, we respected their limitations, and we came out the other side with a deep appreciation for the art of the slow, deliberate pivot. So the next time you find yourself stuck in a corner in Resident Evil, bumping your head against the wall while a zombie slowly shuffles towards you, don't get frustrated. Just remember, you aren't stuck, you're just operating at a higher cinematic frequency. You're moving like a robot, and honestly, in a world this scary, maybe that's the only way to survive. Thanks for joining me in this deep dive into the mechanics of the past. Whether it's a masterpiece or a mechanical disaster, every game has its place in the history of the console. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the clunk, show some love by hitting the like button. It's easier than trying to aim in the fog. Subscribe to keep up with the index and leave a comment below. Are you a tank apologist, or do you still have nightmares about the turn radius? I'll be down there reading your stories while I try to figure out how to walk in a straight line. A massive special thanks goes out to the channel members whose incredible ongoing support keeps this massive documentation mission moving forward every single week. Your backing is the real backbone of the index.